Hello. In this lesson, we have the second group or type of signal words. Signal words that indicate change. Before we start the signal words of change, in the previous lesson, if you remember, the signal words discussed there indicate harmonious addition, like traffic sign that tells us to go in the same direction. Still, signal words of change tell you that there is a change in the direction you are following. You can't go straight on. You have to make a U-turn. There is a curve to the right or to the left. For example, we say that a student is hardworking, well-behaved, always prepared, and effective in the class, but. What do you expect to have after but? We should expect a change in the direction. If you notice, hardworking, well-behaved, always prepared, and effective in the class all go in the same direction. They are all good properties. And what we expect to have after but is a bad or negative property, which is something different or represents a change. So the word but is one of the words that signal change. Other words that signal change are nevertheless, however, still, yet, conversely, on the contrary, on the other hand, contrarily, instead, otherwise, although, though, even though, despite, in spite of, and instead of. Let's have examples on these signal words respectively in the order mentioned. The change that occurs will be shown to you in bold. In 1990, the agricultural experiment that was made to test the sensitivity of some types of harmful fungi had a lot of drawbacks. Nevertheless, its results were used for several years. Other three words can replace nevertheless here. They are, however, still, and yet. Then, another example is, a lenient way in educating and edifying children is strongly believed to result in highly positive outputs that can be realized in the children's behavior and achievements. Conversely, a tough environment of upbringing is almost always thought to lead to different psychological problems later in life. 4 words in this example here may replace conversely. These are, on the contrary, on the other hand, contrarily, instead. Then, the word otherwise is shown to you in the given example. This type of pen is especially designed to be used on this kind of paper. Otherwise, any trial to use other types of pens will fail. So far, these 10 exemplified signal words, with taking the word conversely as an example, as can be seen, start a sentence with a capital letter and are followed by a comma. They can also be preceded by a semicolon and followed by a comma with having the first letter made small. After the comma, there is a full independent sentence. Let's continue with the signal words although, though, even though. See the example. Although, though, even though he was noticeably sick, he refused to see a doctor. Though, even though, as shown, can replace although. We notice the comma in this example, which occurs after the clause that starts with these signal words. Another way of stating this sentence is, he refused to see a doctor, although, though, even though he was noticeably sick. And this time, we don't have commas. These 3 words are not followed directly by a comma like the first 10 words. The whole clause started by these 3 words is followed by a comma when it comes at the beginning. And it is called a dependent clause. This means that it cannot stand alone. So we can't say although he was noticeably sick and stop. There must be a complement. Another note we should mention here is the highlighted change. Notice that the change when we use these words occurs in the other clause. To make it clearer, let me remind you of the first example, which says, the student is hardworking, well-behaved, always prepared, and effective in the class. But we already know here that the change will appear after but. Now compare this with the following sentence. Although that student is hardworking, well-behaved, always prepared, and effective in the class. So the change will be after the comma. This means in the other clause. What about despite and in spite of? The sentence, although, though, even though he was noticeably sick, he refused to see a doctor, that we have just studied, can be restructured to use despite and in spite of as shown to you in the example. Despite or in spite of his noticeable sickness, he refused to see a doctor. Or he refused to see a doctor despite or in spite of his noticeable sickness. Similarly here, if the part started with these two signal words comes first, it should be followed by a comma, if at the end there is no comma. Still, this part that follows these words is not a clause, it's a noun. Notice the schema. And finally, the word instead of. See the example. Next week he has 5 exams. Instead of studying hard, he is chatting on his mobile phone. Instead of can be followed by an ing form, noun, pronoun, or prepositional phrase. The ing form is shown in the first example. Let's have examples on the other forms. I will meet the manager instead of the receptionist. This is an example of a noun following instead of. His father will come instead of him. Here it is followed by a pronoun. We will eat at home instead of in the restaurant. A prepositional phrase follows here. By the end of this lesson, let's say that we have so far covered 2 groups of signal words. Words that signal harmonious addition and words that signal change. Next week, we will have the last group of signal words about cause and effect, in addition to a reading passage that we will read and study the signal words used in it. See you then.